You know that kind of awkward, stressy feeling? You're in a meeting and everyone's going around introducing themselves, saying something about themselves and saying their name, and the person next to you is talking and it's coming up to you and you're kind of mentally rehearsing what you're going to say and your throat gets a bit dry and you swallow it. Hi, my name is Aidan. I'm a paramedic researcher and I have an interest in how kids with diverse genders and sexualities access healthcare. Because, frankly, it sometimes just sucks. See, that stressful kind of awkward feeling just before you start talking in the meeting, that is a tiny, tiny taste of what these kids feel every single day. Because they innately know that we are different. And we are different in a way that we can't change. And unfortunately, there's this biological programming that we all have. That means that we don't want to stand out. We don't want to be in danger and we don't want to be excluded because we know that there's safety in numbers and there's safety in similarity. And so constantly, there's this kind of energy that we're funneling into. How am I portraying myself? How am I appearing? What are my wrists and hands doing? How am I speaking? How am I walking? And there's constant self-scrutiny. And this is not healthy. These kids are high risk, but just how high risk are they? Well, we have really good data on this, fortunately. There's a lot of recent national surveys. We know that 60% of gender and sexuality diverse kids are verbally abused. We know that 1 in 5 are being physically assaulted. And that number rises to 1 out of 3 if they are transgender who are being physically assaulted. 1 in 5 today are actively contemplating self-harm and suicide. And 80% of all of this abuse and harassment is occurring at school. And I found one really shocking statistic, and that is that today's Wednesday, and all across Australia, 1 out of 10 of these children is actually not going to drink any water today at school. And the reason why is because it is too dangerous for them to go to the toilet. They are too scared to go to the toilet at school, and so 1 in 10 of these kids is not going to go to the toilet at school today. They're going to hold it in the entire day because they don't feel safe. And that's just not acceptable. We need to do better for these kids. And we can do better for these kids. And today I'm hoping that I'm going to be able to share with you 3 simple ways that we can do better. Now, these ways are not easy. Changing our default behaviors is not easy. Changing institutional policies is not easy. And teaching our colleagues to change their behaviors is certainly not easy. But these are simple strategies, and also they simply have to happen. And I'd like to share with you an understanding of the identity spectrum. I'd like to learn with you how to speak the language. And then we're going to talk about how to engineer and create a space of trust. And to do that, I want to start with Tony. Tony's a 4-year-old boy, and he is gender variant. Some of you will know what that term means. Some of you have never heard of that term before. That's okay. Tony's 4 years old, beautiful little kid, and everything is perfectly normal, except that he likes to play with dolls and wears pink. That's confusing. And the idea of gender variance can be confusing. So to understand where this is coming from and what this is, we actually need to understand the identity spectrum. And so there's this wonderful diagram, this graphic called the genderbread person, which I love using to understand this. It's really cute. The first thing we're going to touch on is gender identity. That's our psychological sense of self. It's who we believe we are. It's how we feel we are. Then we have gender expression, and all of these are a spectrum. Gender expression is how we portray ourselves to the world. It's how we dress, how we act, how we speak, how we talk, the things we do. And it's descriptive. Then we have our biological sex. That's our genetics, our hormones, our physical sex characteristics, our genitalia. And lastly, defined after we've done everything else, is our sexual orientation. And that's simply who we are attracted to. And the great thing is, none of these things have to match. And that's okay. So back to Tony. Tony is gender variant. He is a male, that's sex, who identifies as a boy, that's gender identity, whose gender expression is variant and expansive. And that's actually perfectly normal for kids. It is totally normal for young boys and young girls and young gender non-binary kids to be exploring a gender expression that's less masculine or less feminine than what we typically expect. And in fact, less than a third of kids who attend specialty gender and identity clinics as kids will end up becoming transgender later on in life. Gender variance is normal and it's healthy. That's different to gender dysphoria. Gender dysphoria is what we used to call gender identity disorder. Now, we don't use the term disorder anymore because having a variant or diverse gender isn't in and of itself inherently a disorder. The issue is that it is excruciatingly stressful to have a body that doesn't match who you see yourself as every minute of every day. And that causes the dysphoria, and that's what we clinically screen for. So when a child is gender dysphoric, we support them. And that might change up until they hit puberty. At Tanner stage 2, that's kind of the cutoff point. They're not changing. After a kid hits puberty and still identifies with a gender other than their sex assigned at birth, that's just not going to change ever. It's not a phase. That's who they are. And we need to get them appropriate care. So I want to introduce you to Jessie. Jessie is awesome. Jessie's 13 and identifies as trans. Now, trans is one of the words that we hear, we talk about, and it's one of this acronym that I'm going to throw at you. And I know it feels like we're adding extra letters every year. I know. But bear with me, because this is the core one. I think we've finally kind of settled on it. We've put a plus on the end to just say, and everything else. And that's lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, intersex, asexual, plus. Lesbian, gay, and bisexual, they're about same-sex attractions. That's sexual orientation and sexuality. Then we have transgender, trans, gender non-binary, gender variant. These all refer to gender identities that don't align with physical and biological sex. Then we have queer, and queer is actually a great term because youth have now co-opted this term to mean any diversity of any kind in any of these domains. So it's a nice umbrella term that a lot of people are starting to use. Then there's intersex. We used to use the word hermaphrodite. We do not use that word anymore, ever. Intersex is someone whose biological sex and physical sex characteristics are not entirely male and not entirely female. And then we have asexuality. And asexuality is someone who doesn't experience sexual attractions towards other people. It doesn't mean they don't want companionship. They most certainly will enjoy romance, and most certainly enjoy the people in their life. They just simply don't have sexual attraction. And then we have plus. Plus is the intersection, the diversity, the myriad of other things. Australia has a rich history of this. For 30,000 years, there have been sister girls and brother boys. These are Indigenous, Aboriginal, and Torres Strait Islanders who identify as trans or gender non-binary. Their communities celebrate them, and unfortunately, colonization has affected how they integrate in their communities. So back to Jessie, 13 and trans. Jessie's in the ED, and your colleague comes up to you and says, so Jessie, bed 13, does Jessie need bloods? And you go, does Jessie need bloods? No, they're fine to go home with a referral. See, you went up to Jessie and you said, hi, my name's Aidan, what's your name? And Jessie said, hi, I'm Jessie. And you said, hi, how are you going today? Jessie said, good, thanks, a bit sick. You said, Jessie, how would you like us to record your details in the medical record today? So I'll say that again. Hi, Jessie, how would you like us to record your medical details or your details in the medical record today? Jessie so appreciated that. It was tactful, it was sensitive. You're not making a fuss. And it gave Jessie the option to say, oh, I'm trans, and please use gender-neutral pronouns, they, them, and their. And so those are the ones you're going to use, they, them, and their pronouns. Personally, I find it difficult. I've tried to adapt to using gender-neutral pronouns, but it's difficult, so I just call people by their name, always. You went up to Jessie and you had that conversation. You ask everyone that, though, because if they're not trans or gender variant, you're just being polite. Because there are people with names like Bathilda and Beatrice who haven't been asked, or haven't been called Bathilda and Beatrice since the 1950s. Everyone calls them Betty. So nothing changes, we're just being polite. Be bold. Call the person by their name. Highlight it, make it bold, underline it, put it at the front of the medical record. And if things get complicated because their name legally is different to the name that they use, guess what? Use their name. That's the language we're going to use. Now let's talk about engineering a space of trust. You were not the first person Jesse interacted with today. There was an admin person, a secretary, a receptionist, a call taker. And it was, hi, can you please fill out this patient care record? Name, date of birth, address, tick the box. Male or female. Now, I don't have to tell you guys that that's a great way to disenfranchise your patient and make them feel like they don't exist. You need to go back to your places of work, have a look at your paperwork, and make sure that there is at least an alternative option. Ideally, though, just put sex and leave it blank, because we're interested in people's biological sex from the medical records. Everything else is going to come out in the history. And speaking of the history, use the HEADS assessment tool. And ask about their risk factors. Are they online? Are they receiving hurtful messages online? Are they on adult dating apps? There are 13 and 14-year-olds right now who are on apps like Tinder and Grindr because they are so isolated where they are that they just want to meet someone who has a shared experience common to them. But I don't have to tell you how worrying it is that these young kids are on these apps and the risks that exposes them to. This is Mai. Mai's a lesbian. She's 15. Her GP doesn't know this. So, Mai, are you having sex? Yes. And are you and your boyfriend using protection? No. Well, did you know that you could get STIs or become pregnant? Yeah. I can't tell you how many times I've heard this story. It happens. I know none of you do it, but it happens. And this is why gender and sexuality diverse kids have a historical mistrust of GPs, pediatricians, family healthcare. That's why they often present to the ED as the first port of call, because we've traditionally sucked at being sensitive to their needs and their healthcare needs. We've rejected them. We've misgendered them. The stakes are high. Suicide is on the cards, make no mistake of that. Rejection is a terrible risk factor. We need to be champions. You are going to make mistakes. We're humans. Everyone here is probably going to misgender someone. I have. Their parents still do years later. We're human, we make mistakes. It's okay. Acknowledge it, apologize, correct yourself, move on, and try not to do it again. They'll understand. We all make mistakes. They get where you're coming from. You care about them. Instead of asking, so are you and your boyfriend having sex, and making that assumption, ask this. So, May, are you attracted to boys, girls, both, or neither? Kids are going to look at you at first like you just asked them how many oranges it takes to build a spaceship. What is going on? Maybe you might get tears. Maybe they might disclose something to you. Maybe they won't. The kids who are in the closet are going to know that you are an ally. You are someone they can trust because you haven't made an assumption. And the kids who aren't, this is even more powerful. You're sending a subliminal message to them that I am a healthcare professional and I don't make judgments. I think this is perfectly normal and natural, and I don't make assumptions about anyone. You can trust me. I'm on your team. And in your history taking, you might ask something like, so, are there any questions about your body that you have for me, or any questions that you can't ask other adults? I'm a healthcare professional, and it's my job to give you information that helps you take care of yourself. Ask about the risk factors. If they're younger, talk about bodily autonomy, consent, the secrets rule, that you never keep secrets from your parents. no matter what any other adult asks you. We need to be champions for these kids. And engineering a space of trust isn't about putting a pride flag in the front of your clinic. You don't have to do that. You can if you want. More important is training your clinical and non-clinical staff to be excellent in the basics, not making assumptions, using correct pronouns, using the right language, and changing your policies, your procedures. Every other special interest group and high-risk patient group has pathways that start at triage. They have clinical procedure manuals. They have specialist nurses and teams. What do these kids get? They get one gender and speciality sexuality clinic at the major peds tertiary hospital in most states. That's it. We need to be doing better. I want to finish off with just a few major risks. When a child is gender variant or transgender or gender non-binary and they approach us and they want to start receiving gender-affirming medical care, the time at which that starts to the time they start actually receiving that care is the time period with the highest risk for suicidality. We need to watch out for that. And we know that kids who are harassed and bullied have exponentially high rates of suicidality, self-harm, depression, stress, and health comorbidities. We also know that getting the right care matters. People who are transgender and gender non-binary, they have incredibly high rates of mental health illness and comorbidity. We give them gender-affirming medical care, and that drops down to the population baseline. Have a look at the Dutch protocol and the 12-16-18 program, which is being modeled all over the world. I don't know any other psychiatric or psychological intervention that is that effective at reducing the burden of mental health. Go back to your practices. Understand the identity spectrum. Speak their language. Use gender-neutral pronouns. Use the pronouns they want. Call them by the name they want. And create a space of trust with the right paperwork, the right policies. And don't just do it yourself, train your clinical and your non-clinical staff. These kids are a high-risk patient population, but everyone here in this room is a highly competent, highly compassionate clinician. So on behalf of 14-year-old me, and every other child in Australia who is gender diverse and of a diverse sexuality, I want to thank you so much for being champions for us.